Welcome to In the Flow, where we dive into how marketing leaders use operations to cut through the chaos and seize opportunity. So, Wesley, thank you for joining me today on the pod. Just a bit of background. You co-founded Monks back in 2001. I believe it wasn't called that, and we'll sort of find out more about that. Notice you've got thousands of employees now around the world. So you've been going 24 years, so it's super impressive. So just from your point of view, I'd love to know a bit about the background and how Monks is involved. And obviously we'll talk a bit about your background. But I'd just love to know the story. I'm just really, really interested in that.
Yeah. 2001. It's a long time ago. We're in year 25. At that time, we were very young when we started it. So people often ask if there was some grand vision, and there clearly
Of
was not.
course it was. Yeah.
Yeah. It's nice retrofit one, but that wasn't what was happening. We had been part of a startup. It was sort of the dot-com boom slash bust cycle, and we had a very small version of that cycle in the Netherlands, and we were part of it. And as employees, and we looked at it and went, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's start something that is a little more real, and that's really celebrating what then still felt like quite a new channel where we could have different sort of user experiences and ways to have fun and be creative and is some to some extent make art. And that was really the first version of what was then called Media Monks, was called Media Monks Interactive Art. And we were just making interesting, cool user experiences. Really just figuring out what a user experience in the internet could be. And of course, it sort of coincided with the explosion of Flash, which allowed for a lot more high touch interactive sort of opportunities. So that's really what it was based on, just celebration of a new channel and having fun.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I mean, Flash obviously was an interesting topic back in the day. At
Yeah,
our previous SaaS company before this, Proof HQ, our viewer was built in Flash for a number of years,
nice.
and we had to time it really well in terms of going from Flash to HTML5. And everyone was like, "Yeah, you got to go," but we had all these enterprises who just had Flash and they just couldn't move. But anyhow, it's like that was another story. So then it sort of evolved. I mean, you guys are now, I see you're very AI driven. You got Monk's Flow, which is interesting. Your title, you're really focused on AI, right? So yeah, just tell us a little bit about how it got to that.
Yeah, I mean, the company, I think we went through probably 4 big moments of change in the organization, and it feels like we're now on the 5th big change.
Yeah.
And all those changes are really figuring out relevance, right? Are we relevant for our talent, for our clients at the industry level? And if not, what do we need to do to be relevant? And I think that drove some of our decision making in expansion over the last 2 decades. I think looking at the current landscape, we had our existential moment almost 3 years ago, where you're seeing generative AI, which up until then in our industry had been more of a toy. Like we'd done some really beautiful artistic, we used to call it more machine learning than generative AI, but machine learning experiments. But you see the technology switch from toy to tool in a way that sort of opened up the number one question we always ask ourselves when we have to do these big pivots. Is it real? And if it's real, is it really happening right now? And we answered yes to both of those. And if that's the case, then you need to change. So we've been, I think, very fast and first when it comes to the adoption of the technology, the changes it makes to our ways of working, our organizational structure, our commercial model. And as part of that, I took on the chief AI officer role because also think there is some value in showing the importance of it through the lens of a bit of a sort of a founder point of view.
Mhm.
It takes a lot of conviction for people to start working in different ways, right? This is
Yeah.
more of a change management challenge really than a tech challenge.
Yeah, and it's exactly. I actually wanted to ask you about. I mean, how many employees do you have now in the agency?
We're a little above 7,000.
And driving change through 7,000 team members takes, I mean, yeah, it needs a founder. I think you're right. But how do you sort of push this? I mean, because it's getting the timing right. Yeah, is it a fad? Is it not a fad? I mean, obviously, I think it's here to stay, and it's how we use it. But it's also like how soon do you go into it, and what do you use? I noticed you guys have a lot of agents that you use, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm quite interested in. Yeah, so you're a very forward-looking agency, and for 7,000 people being that forward-looking and that quick is relatively unique, I'd say. I mean, we work with a lot of agencies here at Ziflow, and you people are using it, but you really position yourselves for that. And it was it just you guys just driving really hard? Well, what were the actual practical steps of going in this direction?
Yeah, I think the reason as an industry we're probably moving a little slower than we should is because it is the antithesis of our commercial model, right? A lot of agency revenue is being paid for the time of your people. Um, and both people and time aren't a great proxy for value in this landscape. So it's actually one of the things we talk about quite a lot. Normally, agencies are a way for clients to bring the outside in, and because of that, innovate a little more quickly. I think as an industry, we're sort of letting that role and responsibility waver a little because it's such an uncomfortable truth that our commercial model is dependent on people in time. We did a few things. First was a clear and relatively well specified view of what was happening. And I think one of our strengths has been we called it early and we've been very consistent. So even a few years ago, we were probably saying things that felt a little bit sci-fi that now are extremely normal. And I think that consistency has helped both our clients and our colleagues trust the roadmap because you can sort of go back 2 years and pretty much see the path.
Yeah, so you sort of deliver on what you've said. I think that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
important.
And we hear that from clients a lot where there'll be an AI story of the day and every
Mhm.
agency that comes by switches their stories a lot. And we've just been very clear and very transparent and I think very consistent. We then focus first and foremost on our own team and talent. I think we've been very straightforward and transparent about what we expect to happen, which is we do expect this to impact jobs. That's what the technology says on the tin. I found a little paternalistic when all the messaging was it won't replace people, it won't take jobs. I always felt that that was not true.
So just on that, do you have a culture of being just very open and honest within the agency?
Yeah, we're stock listed companies, so there's limits. Sometimes what you can be open about, but that's definitely a part of the DNA. The promise from our perspective, the employer promise was we don't quite know what this means 2, 3 years from now, but we are going to make sure our teams are well trained, enabled, have the ability to use the technology in meaningful ways because that's going to be important whatever happens, not just for us as a business, but also for talent and their careers. So we focus a lot on internal training and enablement, made sure people had access to tools early and quickly with all of the legal complexities and frameworks that came with that. And then after sort of having the vision in place and the internal both clarity and enablement piece, it really ended up being about commercialization. How do we change the economics of the work we do for clients?
So that's a really interesting point, right? Sorry. That changing of the commercial model. I mean, agency have been working the same way for many, many years.
Yeah.
And the commercial model, hey, if you're doing creative production, there's a campaign, you get X versions, etc. More versions, you get upcharge, etc. Um, I mean, now you're sort of in the AI world. I mean, you don't have to go into specifics what you've done, but what sort of lens did you guys look at it? Because again, really large agency. I'm sure you've got your commercial model. I'd love to understand how you guys approach that.
Yeah, it's honestly it's quite interesting because you have to run both commercial models at the same time. We have all of our existing clients aren't ready to move outside of traditional time and material models or retained models. where a lot of our new clients come to us because we have different models. So you sort of have to run both, which is interesting.
And you sort of have to
Um,
understand which one to run with which client, right? So when you're doing sort of a
yeah,
pitch, you need to, yeah,
yeah, and it's different ways of working as well.
yeah.
But more and more, we call it our version of time and material of T&M is talent and machine. So
Mhm.
we have amazing, talented people either in the lead or in the loop, depending on the workflow. So it's either people in the lead with machines taking care of some of the speed and scale, or in the loop, where especially in these agentic workflows, the machines do a lot more of the work, and our people sort of from makers become pacemakers, and the elevator work the agents do. We have fixed fees against that combination, where we're not doing rates or cost of compute anymore. We just package it as a fixed fee. Sometimes that's a project-based fixed fee, and sometimes it's a monthly ongoing fee. You get a minimum amount of output against that fee structure.
It's almost like a software subscription model.
It feels a little more like that. It feels a
Yeah.
little more like that, and that it's interesting that you're saying that because we're also updating what you get, right? Because the cost of an incremental asset gets ever cheaper.
Mm.
So we have elements now where in these monthly costs, some things are infinite, like infinite translations, infinite emails, and some things are okay, 250 creative ideas, or right.
Yeah.
So it's you can sort of balance it out a little against the things that now are no longer a bottleneck. We can just do as many of them as you could ever potentially want, and some things that are I wouldn't say a bottleneck, but are still capped based on the cost of the talent and compute together. But yeah, it's an ongoing sort of evolving model, but quite interesting to work with clients on as well, right? Because not every client is ready for those models, but we're seeing more and more clients sort of raise their hand, going, we'd like to try something new.
Because you get agencies that are just doing translations, right? And that each translation's going through a whole set of people. So if you can automate that, that's really interesting sort of scaling.
Yeah, and I think one of the big takeaways that I sometimes think that clients struggle with, but maybe we all struggle with, is AI isn't necessarily a magic button, not yet, right? It's there. There's clear progress, and I think there's rumors of ChatGPT 5 launching in July, so that might change everything again. But it's less about um, press a button and everything happens. It's more about the percentage of manual effort that you can now support or replace with compute. So in translation, we still put especially local relevance experts on some of these pieces of work, but 80 to 90% of the traditional manual labor is now compute. But you still have some really key people to make sure you get great, instead of something that maybe is a little more hit or miss. And in some areas, maybe you're only doing that with 30% of the manual labor. So it's a bit of a spectrum between 30 to 90%, which meaningfully impacts the pricing, of course, of the things that we're selling.
Got it. And I mean, if there are other agencies that you might want to give advice to that aren't competing with you necessarily, how would you sort of recommend them approach? I mean, because you guys are, I looked at your website. You've got, all these agents. I mean, they're pretty broad. I mean, I'd like to talk a little bit about how you guys looked at it. I mean, I assume you got some software engineer or engineering team that help implement this. Is that the sort of way you sort of suggest other agencies, other companies go about it? Because even like, brands can probably use it in some of the stuff they do, right?
Yeah, well, we actually we demoed a really a really cool agentic workflow at Cannes,
Yeah.
sort of insight to strategy to creative ideation, briefing in between, and it was fully agentic. Insights agent sort of looking at potential social trends and other topics, handing over to a series of strategic agents. And then based on your favorite strategy, you would sort of pull together a great creative brief with a briefing agent, and you can give that creative brief to creative agents. It was a nice way to show the circularity of these agentic workflows, and the outcome of the agentic work is really good. But we are putting those agents to work for clients as well. So clients with direct
Yeah.
access and TSAP with agents. To your point, I think that there'll be a bit of a buy, build, wait framework where some clients or agencies will just buy something. Some will want to build something because they have very specific expectations, and some will just wait to see if the frontier models solve it out of the box. I don't think there's necessarily wrong or right decision,
Yeah.
but it's where your appetite for investment versus I think talent base sort of sits. If you have tech talent, you'll probably be building some of this yourself.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting, right? Because as we said, yeah, ChatGPT 5 may be coming out. It's all moving so quickly, and you just don't know who's going to be doing what. I mean, you've got Cursor, you got various other coding tools, and then it's crazy. It's just all going so fast. So, I mean, I think where some companies might be a bit worried, or agencies, is like, how much do you invest in building these agents now versus like just yeah, as you said, waiting and seeing if they actually will just do it, and then you just piggyback on it. But yeah, if you also wait, then you get out innovated. That's a tough decision.
So the way we look at it is, I think there's real value in sort of being in the space, figuring things out, because more and more this is about how the work happens. It's less and less about the work. If we sort of pull the trend line forward, the models will get better at the things that we do. So the question is, how do you use them in your organization? And that's something where there's real value in sort of mapping out your own workflows, starting to put agents in place, starting to put different optimized workflows in place, but then not over committing to a single tech stack, right? Because realistically, and I use almost all of the
Yeah.
major models. Models have they're converging to some extent, but they all have their strengths and weaknesses,
Yeah.
and also the cost. If you want to do something at scale, you might not need the best model, but you need the model that can deliver a specific use case at a certain price point. So I think it's valuable to really start understanding how you make this type of intelligence part of your working infrastructure without overly committing to a single provider, because that feels a little early.
Yeah, it does feel like they have different strengths. It's great. I was I think I did a LinkedIn post on this, but yeah, I'm using like 3 or 4 models now. So and I'm like, okay, we want to do this at Ziflow. This, yeah, do some deep research, and I then run it through 4 different models. Now, what's happened is you get like these 4 outputs, and it's like trying to like bring it all together into one document. That's pain. That's been painful because you want to take the best bits. And what we're also finding in the product is some models in some different, like, the O3, or whatever, just the different versions even within the OpenAI
Yeah.
ChatGPT models, they'll have strengths and weaknesses, and then you got to use Gemini for something else and so on. And it's like constantly testing and like trying to figure out what works best. I mean, with a demo that you did, I mean, do you think we'll get to a point where it's actually running a lot of the creative ideas, briefing? But do you think there's still, the human input? Well, what is the story? What is the sort of the campaign idea, for example?
I want to say that the second scenario is
Yeah.
true.
Okay.
I want to say that, but I think we also have to be realistic that the models in the current state are really quite good at commoditizing a lot of our services into software. And this is where it, I found it quite interesting, where um, vanilla out of the box, the models, we could do that now, right? We could go to the models and get 100 ideas for something. The question then is, are there going to be good ideas in there? Yes, but the model doesn't necessarily know which one is a good idea and which one isn't. So the real challenge is no longer in, can I get ideas, because I can get a million ideas. How can I at scale get consistently good ideas that are on brand, that are relevant to culture, that we know are aligned with what tends to be high performing? And that's where it becomes really interesting to put these agentic workflows together, where you get much more elevated output than just sort of straight vanilla model, opens of vanilla models. And it opens up a question of the role of an agency. Because I think it's almost more people below the fold than above the fold, where you're putting the workflows together, you're tuning the models, you're building the knowledge bases, you're putting the system prompts in place. And if you do that really well, as we showed off in Cannes, the quality of the strategic and creative output is amazing. But it's a lot of work by people that makes it possible to consistently get that quality of output.
Got yeah.
But now it's there. Machines can do a massive amount of work.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's so quick, right? It's
yeah,
just yeah, the speed of it. I feel like the agents solve sort of two problems. One is like, delving into different data sets and so on. So, they can look at your LinkedIn profile, they can look at your Gmail, whatever. They can, if you're doing like a personal agent. But I find the other thing they're solving for, which we don't have the technology yet, is like having these mini LLMs, if you will. So an LLM for a customer. Because you still need volume of data, but at least now with the agent, you can say, okay, go look at this content and this analytics and bring that into so you're just building a bigger prompt essentially to help, you know, give it more context. I feel like that's where the agents have got value. And maybe when we start building mini LLMs for each client, because I'd love that, because we've got, thousands of customers and all their content, but I want to push that into something that just is constantly learning what the comments are, what the
yeah.
changes are, and so on. But it's really hard still and very expensive to run these mini LLMs.
And I think that's the whole landscape is you can sort of see where this is headed, and you can get sort of abstractions of it, and it feels a little clunky, and it doesn't quite do what you want it to do, but you can see that it sort of works.
Yeah, just sort of where it's going. Yeah. And it's moving so fast. So you sort of like do some of it because you feel like it's just going to catch up to you. Yeah.
That to me is one of the more interesting takeaways is you can vision your way through what you know you want it to be. Start building the first version of those workflows, which will feel clunky and not quite there. But the models get predictably better. Um, and they're getting predictably better every 3 months or so now. So the models do catch up to what you want to get done. And I honestly think video is probably the most amazing example there where if you look at the progress that got made in about a 2-year period, like that's insane.
Yeah.
And I think doesn't get talked about enough.
Yeah.
But
I agree.
uh yeah, it was setting up the pipeline. And then a year ago that pipeline gave you really clunky,
Mm.
pretty much unusable content. But the same pipeline can now give you amazing content. It's focus on the pipeline, focus on the ways of working, and it's a build it and the models will come type
Yeah.
concept, which isn't far removed from the truth.
I think it also there's one aspect to it from a sort of a consumer point of view is that, and I think why adoption. I mean, a lot of people are using ChatGPT and et cetera, but they're using it a lot for text, and as you said, for video, not so much. Even for images, I only used it the other day, and we have this series called Proof It, and they'd used a different. It's almost like a handwritten font, so it's really hard to replicate because the designer who designed it literally used his own handwriting on it. And I was like, now we want to replicate it for other text. And so something was off on it, and I eventually figured out it's like they got smooth outlines, and it's all like it was jagged edges, like it's a semi paintbrush that he used. I thought, you know what, I'm just going to put into chat. So I put into ChatGPT, Gemini, and Perplexity, and I said, take this, let your content flow, and create the word proof it, similar colors with a little stripe at the bottom. One of them was just really way off, like it was, a year
Yeah.
and a half ago. The other two were spot on. I mean, they both generated the same look and feel, perfectly designed, and I could just send it to the designer. I was done. But I think what happens is like there are some people who tried it out a year ago, whatever, tried out video, it wasn't great, and they just go, you know what, and just assuming it's still not great, because you think like some of these keynotes, like, or the Google ones and so on, are like, yeah, it's like they generate what they know. And I think that might be a little bit of the case here, where we find some clients are like, we're just not going to use AI right now, it's just not there, etc. But man, it's good, it can be really good.
It's honestly the first time because I as an industry, we sort of live and die on the hype cycle, right? There's this continuous hype cycle. The previous hype cycle was metaverse and NFTs, but
Yeah.
we don't talk about that anymore. And this is the very first time where I've seen a hype cycle where I think broadly the technology is underestimated, because a hype cycle normally means people overestimate the opportunity and then get very disappointed. I think to your point, a lot of people have had an interaction with a model or an LLM. It didn't quite do what you wanted it to do. And people sort of step back and they're like, this isn't ready for prime time. I think partly that's not really understanding the exponential speed that these models get better at. And the second piece is LLMs as a product category are really, really clunky. The difference you can get as a super user that really understands how to prompt versus somebody that's just using these things for the first time is so big. That's not really how we think about software, right? Normally we have easier interfaces and you you all get the same type of output, and here the range is just massively, massively bigger.
Yeah, because you sort of get all these posts where people go like, "Oh yeah, generate this large prompt and so on." I mean, it's like, man, it's like you just don't have time necessarily, or if you invest so much time in the prompt and then it's wrong, then it's like, oh, you still have this incorrect prompt. Um, in terms of where you're going next, I mean, are you calling it Monk Flow, or what are you guys
Yeah,
calling
so
it?
so we have our own solution called Monk Slow, and really,
Oh yeah,
it was interesting. 2 years in, we launched it to the outside world 2 CESs ago, and it was really born out of a grassroots project, which had a very simple concept. We do lots of work that is relatively repeatable. Let's start packaging those repeatable workflows, and in those workflows use automation and AI in ways that help us do it a little faster, do it at a little more scale, do it at a little bit more quality, but really sort of collapsing this very manual labor space that the agency landscape tends to be made up out of into more sort of automation. And that worked, but then you get the realization that we do versions of the same thing for all of our clients over and over again. And every client is beautifully unique, but also is really solving the same problem. So it became really interesting to start packaging that to our clients as well. And we now have two versions of that. We have managed services where our talent is in the loop of these flows and we just take over parts of what our clients are trying to solve, mostly in marketing services. Different commercial model, you get a lot more, you pay a lot less. And we're also giving clients access to the agentic workflows themselves. So they have their own software that especially helps them with insight and idea creation and generation.
and is this like a product you've developed and you give them access to log in and so on?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And really with our clients, we're on a roadmap to what we call marketing as a service. Like how much are you marketing? Can you start getting as a service versus
Brilliant.
we've called it how do we move from agencies to agents, which is a strange thing to say out loud as something that for 24 years mostly operated as an agency. But that's really where we see the landscape headed.
Yeah, no, that's smart. Like I said, I think you're well ahead of most in terms of the thinking. I love the idea about moving from agencies to or agents. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. And in terms of these agents, and can you give us a little bit of insight? Like, what are you guys using to build these? Are there certain tool sets you guys use, etc., that people can look into?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really good. Uh, I'm not even sure if it's open source, but really good agentic frameworks like LangChain and N8N are quite popular. You can use Comfy UI as well. So a lot of what we do is we map out the workflows. We have something called Pathways, which is our own version of these types of automation workflow tools, which is part of Monkflow. A lot of the work in the agents is the knowledge base, the system prompt, and any specific model tuning. Where like this is an agent that does creative ideation work based on what we believe good looks like. And it's quite interesting to because a lot of the value I think from an agency you can capture in how those agencies actually operate, and that's where a lot of the effort has gone. Uh, More so than specifically building the agentic workflows because that's relatively simple nowadays.
Interesting. Yeah. So you're sort of taking your IP in terms of the creative direction, if you will, and you sort of put that into, yeah, that's really interesting.
And the knowledge bases, like it's really interesting to think about um, how we do it for existing clients where we have a knowledge base for a client setup, which means there's understanding of we call it a brand agent, right? We understand the brand guidelines, we understand the tone of voice, we understand the high performing campaigns based on historic data. But that becomes a really meaningful data set and knowledge base for the agents to be high performing on top of.
Does that knowledge of the client, you feed that into, how does that work? You train them, yeah, just, yeah,
Well,
practical.
it's mostly the knowledge bases that it used to be a lot of focus on RAG, retrieval augmented generation.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a little less popular nowadays, but
It's funny. It's a term, like it's so new and it's already like out there.
yeah,
It's
it's
crazy.
already a little less popular now than
Yeah,
6 months ago. But it really just is about how do we put additional context about this brand into the inference, right?
yeah,
So if we want to get a creative idea, how do we make sure the creative idea understands the context of the brand? Which could be brand guidelines and maybe just some really well written structure around what high performing content for this brand looks like. It could also tap into their performance data. It could also tap into what's happening at the industry level and how do we compete in a space with the right reasons to buy. One of the more interesting takeaways is that especially the creative agents, clients tend to love the output from the agentic workflow
okay.
because it's amazingly on brief and on brand, which from an AC perspective might not be the best way to get to great work, right? You can make a case that
Mm,
in Cannes, probably a quite a large percentage of the award-winning work probably wasn't on brief, right? Somebody re-engineered the brief, somebody came up with something proactively, something was an aha moment that sort of tilted away from what was
yeah.
briefed. So there is an interesting, and we're in the midst of that conversation at the moment, where we know with the workflow that we have, if I brief a human creative, I'm probably happy if that creative reads the brief,
Yeah.
but they're probably not reading the additional 50 pages of documentation that the client shared, and they're probably not doing full industry research, and they probably haven't seen the last 5 campaigns by the main competitor. What the agents do really well is be able to operate within the context of all of those things, which means the results tend to be super on brief and very on brand, but also just with an awareness that you tend to not get as consistently from a purely human process. Which makes sense because machines are good at lots of data and lots of context. But the flip side of that is maybe the human power is something that's unexpected and outside of the context is not quite where we're getting machines.
So how do you balance this going forward?
I think it's a really interesting. It's a very philosophical conversation to some
Mm,
extent. We were talking to a client last week when we ran through a fully agentic workflow, but with people in the loop. And this client was like, I just want to set it and forget it. Right. I don't
okay.
necessarily need to be in the loop. And then you're like, that's great. Then you definitely want the agentic workflow to be super on brand, super on brief,
Mm.
no surprises. And you probably want to almost tune down the the
Creativity in a
element.
way. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
we want extremely guardrailed outcomes. The flip side of that is if you're doing person in the loop, maybe you want 5 ideas that are opposite of the brief or off brief, but you sort of have to give the agentic workflow the role because it's not naturally you have to system prompt and prompt these agents to fill in a specific role, and a specific role could be give me the 3 most unexpected responses to this brief, right? You can sort of play with it. But yeah, it's been interesting to see how on brief and on brand translates to clients being quite happy with the results, because of course that's what they're initially asking for.
Yeah. I can imagine if you do adaptations for social and things like that, it's great. But it's a brand new campaign and so on, it might be a little bit, yeah, that's where you want to be a little bit broader, right? In terms of the idea generation. So something just totally changing topic and direction here. So, last few years, and it's always been there's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions within the agency world. And again, it's pretty unique for an agency like Monks to be going sort of, you guys 23, 24 years now. I mean, have you guys made any acquisitions throughout that time, or have you just been growing organically?
No, we've done that in two waves. We started with acquisitions in 2014. So we had done a completely sort of bootstrapped organic growth path until 2014. Uh, we took on a PE partner at that time because we wanted to do bigger international expansion. And in that expansion, we did a series of mergers, M&A, very strategic based on where we wanted to grow and missing capabilities. Quite a few people from those mergers still at the company in important leadership roles. So really impressive group of companies and people that joined. And then we did a second wave starting in 2018 when we as a company did a strategic deal with Sir Martin Sorrell, S4. And from that moment, in about 4 years, we did, I think it was 30 acquisitions or mergers. A lot of smaller ones, a few bigger ones. Again, very strategic, building out sort of the end-to-end offering that we felt the global brands needed and wanted, which is both capability and footprint. And then the work has been to bring that together in a cohesive, capability-led model that clients can easily ingest and buy. Of course, we did all of that, and then normally after all of that work can always be better, but we did a lot of the heavy lift. In a normal landscape, we could have rested on our laurels a little and just
Yeah.
run the business. And then, of course, we ran into the AI moment. Um, which I do think we're well set up for because of the sort of strategic M&A roadmap we ran through. It means we have, I think, the right talent to do an end-to-end agencies to agent sort of move. But yeah, it's interesting to think about that level of disruption after you've just gone through all of the hard work of expansion.
Yeah, because it's merging cultures, different work clients, and so on. And we have a lot of agency clients, and we've seen like a 300% increase in M&A since 2022 within the agent. It's just been so busy, whereas the rest of the world is like no M&A. But yeah, the agencies decided let's go and acquire or merge.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the agency culture, right? You have new smaller agencies innovate really quickly, and then bigger agencies buy the smaller ones to help with some of that innovation. Um, and sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't work. I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens over the next few years. If we'll see a lot of AI native agencies be acquired, I suspect so. But there is a little bit of an innovator's dilemma, I think, at the bigger agency group level, because so much of the commercial model is
Change,
not
yeah, being
necessarily
disrupted.
aligned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how much of the M&A is stopping the innovation to some extent
Mm.
instead of embracing it.
Yeah, because that's a kind of question for you was like, how do you keep a large organization, as the agency grows, to to compete with that level of innovation of a smaller agency? Because I mean, obviously you've created this role, which is great. But yeah, I think that's the challenge, right? How do you keep that innovation up?
Yeah. I think it's really difficult to innovate top down, especially at scale. Um, so I think it needs a vision and a framework of sorts. But a lot of what the company is now doing successfully came out of grassroots activity across the globe that we were able to scale or put investment against. So we have been able to get into a cadence of a lot of grassroots energy and activity driving the change, and then really sort of powering it up or scaling it up where possible. Because I do think, especially in this space, it we have a funny slide, which when it comes to AI transformation, we tell clients don't just send emails, because there's this sort of trend of the CEO email. First, now we're AI native, and those emails are, I think, well intentioned, but that's really not how change happens.
Yeah, so this whole like, hey, we're AI first email, you can't hire someone if you don't test it with it, you can AI do it and so on, those sort of emails.
Yeah, and it's you read those emails and go, well, that's fine, and it
Yeah.
shows leadership intent, but I don't think that people really understand the complexity of change and change management.
Mm,
And it's also, I think, really easy to be wrong if you're 3, 4, 5 steps removed from the actual day-to-day work.
yeah.
So we are very focused on having our subject matter experts that are in the work day to day lead the change, and then really backing them with the right talent, resources, investment. And that's created, I think, a really good innovation heavy culture, even at our size. I've seen a few sort of AI native agencies, but I haven't really seen anybody break through yet. And it is sort of a logical, like it's almost you're waiting for it to happen. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same in the software space. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of AI native companies. We've seen a few that are trying to do exactly what Ziflow does. They've not been able to get off the ground because you still need the core product that's the boring bit where you need people to actually interact with it. But it does, you're always in the back of your mind. So we're working on Review AI, really difficult. But what we've seen work, and I've not sent the email to our team, so I agree with you. It's like those COVID emails where everyone's like, "Hey, we're up and running." It's
Well,
like, yeah, just
well,
it's another email, but it just feels like, yeah, these CEO AI emails. I think you're right. It's like, yeah, it's great saying it, but what actually happens on it, and that's culture to me. It's like, oh, I hate using the word empowering the team, but do you have a culture of like, hey, letting the team go and experiment, test it out, come up with great ideas, and like bring it and say, hey, like really celebrating that to me is like key, because that's the stuff that moves a business forward way quicker beyond the day to day. You've got the always on bits you're doing, but those experiments people are doing and coming up with great ideas, that just like sort of propels you forward. But I think that comes down to culture.
yeah, agree. It's culture. I think it needs a little bit of freedom in a framework. You have to trust your people to know what actually is possible, and then give them a bit of space to move, which is probably one of the reasons that the AI adoption or transformation will move a little less quickly than it probably could or should. Because at the global enterprise level, it's risk aversion is real.
Totally. I mean, we still have customers where go like, yeah, we've got to switch all AI off in the product. We're just not allowed to use it. All AI, switch it off. Which I get, I understand. I mean, it's very new technology. But in some cases, I mean, you can do things so much faster. So there's now security frameworks and so on coming out around it. But it's all around the LLMs. But rather than, hey, we're using different LLMs to drive this. It'd be interesting to see what that adoption rate is. And I think that part's going to be slower than we think.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, I think,
agree.
yeah, the tech's going to be super fast, but yeah, the actual adoption SMB great, but yeah, as you go, it's going to be a bit slower.
I think some of the messaging that you're seeing from the sort of frontier labs it has started feeling similar, where we'll probably have something that feels a lot like AGI in the next few years, but it maybe doesn't change the world that much, because the real world is quite robust and full of friction.
Yeah, and it doesn't like change.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting if we end up solving one of the great sort of scientific scientific questions of our age, and it ends up just being a chatbot for most of us. That's it.
Yeah, you just
And
chat and it takes over. Yeah, great.
yeah,
There we go. It doesn't make for a great movie, but yeah, that's reality for
yeah,
you.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
fun.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Wesley. I appreciate it. I mean, if people want to stay up to date, where's best to follow you? Is it LinkedIn?
Yeah, probably LinkedIn, either the Monk's account or my personal account. That's where we're quite active.
We can see the latest and greatest that you guys are kind of
Yeah,
coming up with. Yeah, and it's brilliant. But thank you so much for taking the time today, and
cool,
yeah, for sharing some insights. It was really, really good.
cool. Appreciate it, man. Fun chat.
I'm sharing insights from around the marketing, tech, and operations industries on how marketing and creative teams can get more done together.